Hole. Ran Ikujiro. It was dawn in the rainy season, when a long, depressing rain was falling from the gray sky like a trickle every day. I was on night duty, and with my sleepy eyes, I saw off the first train of the morning. I was gazing at the rainy eastern sky, which looked like a pale ink with chalk powder dissolved in it, as my senior and colleague Yoshimura and I were starting to get ready to go home. We were gazing at the rainy eastern sky through the glass door, where the sweat was dripping off the window. As if remembering something, the wall phone rang, 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 rang. Yoshimura, who was nearby, immediately hung up the receiver, but he said, "What? It's a piece of junk. Where is it?" Yeah, let's go," he said, hanging up the phone, and said, "Hey, it's a piece of junk." The guy who just found it said that he must have been hit by the last train. He looked rotten. This piece of junk is the term used by our fellow railroad workers to refer to someone who has been run over by trains. I also took the railroad exam right after graduating from school last year, and fortunately I passed, but I was made to wait a lot for some reason, and in the end I was hired in the fall, so it was only about half a year before the rainy season. However, perhaps because I work in the track maintenance area, I have already encountered 3 or 4 pieces of junk. The most amazing one was a young woman who apparently took the plunge with a lot of determination, but perhaps because of that, she was defeated so vividly. When I saw that she had been run over at the base of her thighs and neck, and that both legs were connected at the base of the thighs by a thin layer of skin that stretched out in a wavy pattern, and that she was still holding the hem of her kimono tightly with her right hand, I even thought to myself later that I had done a good job making it to the barracks by myself. For those 2 or 3 days, I could barely eat, and I was spitting so much that the root of my tongue was burning, and there was another story I heard, but there was also a young woman named 189, who, after the autopsy was completed and the dismembered body was collected, it seemed that her right hand was missing, and no matter how many times they searched the area, they couldn't find it. We investigated further to make sure that it couldn't have been a stray dog that had carried it away, and found that the man's hand, which was like a glove made of the palm of his hand, was tightly gripping one of the wheels of the run-over train, which was already in the depot. It was truly frightening. The inspection officer thought that there were some work gloves lying around, so he went to grab them, but found that the young woman's hand had come out of the joint, and 2 or 3 inches of pure white tendon had protruded from its bloody mouth. In desperation, he must have grabbed hold of the wheel, but he had to bow his fingers one by one to get it out. It's an incredible story that I've gone off on a tangent, but anyway, upon hearing the news of the broken piece at dawn, Yoshimura, myself and the 3 other workers who were also on night duty, headed out to the scene in a gasoline truck. The train leaves Higashinakano on the Chuo line and heads to Tachikawa, a rare straight course in Japan, and finally curves from Tachikawa to Hino, and it is located almost halfway between Tachikawa and Hino. I should have mentioned earlier that I was at the Tachikawa station at the time. The gasoline car was nothing more than a trolley, but it was faster than we expected, and we held on tightly to avoid being thrown off, but we were suffering from lack of sleep and drizzle and were completely depressed. Then one of the workers remembered, "Hey, Mr. Kura's mother was like this last year, wasn't she?" Then, "Yes, it was around here, and it was terrible, too." The other man nodded in agreement. Mr. Kura is a veteran worker, a huge, muscular man, with the strength to easily hold 2 cement bags under his arms, which I couldn't handle, and he is a man who is highly regarded among our group, who are known for their strength. Moreover, he had a terrible drinking habit and a serious illness that meant that if he drank, he would never return home straight. His wife resented his inaction and financial difficulties, and perhaps due to the lung disease he had been suffering from, he committed suicide by jumping off a building last year before I arrived, something I had heard for a long time. And on a side note, a gasoline car whizzed by. The dense forest on both sides of the track suddenly stopped, and a straight rail like that drawn by a ruler continued far away toward the Tama River, white and wet. Perhaps because we had suddenly left the forest, the drizzle penetrated my skin as I sat on the exposed car, and I was hit by a chill. "That's no good. Hey, isn't today the 17th? "Ah, that's the day Kurasan's mother ate a piece of bread." No one replied. But then Yoshimura whispered in my ear, "This is where the piece of bread was eaten." Then the gasoline car suddenly slowed down and stopped. I instinctively stood up to look, and saw a man in a dark kimono lying on the side of the tracks a few meters ahead. We all went over in silence, and found that his thighs and neck had been run over so beautifully that it looked as if he had been sleeping on the rails. "The head's gone," one of them said, crouching down to look. "Oh, it's standing there." Looking at that person, I saw that it was indeed just the head, standing on the gravel of the roadbed like an ornament. "Tch," the workman clicked his tongue and went to pick it up, but suddenly he let out a cry like, "eh," and came running back as if swimming. "It's Mr. Kura." He pointed at the head with trembling hands. Mr. Kura?" Everyone looked at each other, feeling a chill as the drizzle drops ran down their collars. The story had just been brought up, and even the strong-willed workmen's faces suddenly turned pale. After a while, we all finally gathered together and went to pick up the head, and sure enough, it was Kurasan's. And more than just the pain of a broken head, the mask-like face of the head had a look of horrible fear engraved on it, as if it had just seen something. And then I saw something terrible. Next to the head was a green tuna about 4 or 5 feet long, run over to shreds. I remember starting to flinch and the blood draining from my head. Yoshimura and the other workers must have noticed it right away, as they seemed to be purposely looking away. One of the workers was cleaving his dry lips, but blurted out, oh, don't be resentful." Everyone looked at each other in shock, as if they had been hit in a critical spot, and their faces all looked exactly like Kurasan's severed head, which was lying there, white as paper. As we returned to the station and finally caught our breath, we heard the accounts of the drivers of the last train last night and the first train this morning. According to them, the driver of the first train this morning had already seen the body when he passed by. The body was definitely there. There was no doubt about it, as they had taken the trouble to stop the car 2 or 3 meters before and pulled the car off the rails beside it and lowered it down, and the conductor had also testified to this. However, the driver of the last train said that there was definitely no such piece of junk. First of all, that was just where the forest ended, and on both sides were open rice paddies, so if such a man had been on the tracks he would have found him, and a man that sturdy would have been able to tell from the impact of the car. Not only that, but the conductor of the last train then said the following. He was leaning back in the driver's compartment at the back of the train, gazing blankly out the window as the train flew by, when, just around that area, in the light of the interior light filtering in through the window, he suddenly saw a figure. It was a figure standing and walking, and on either side of the rails, on the right side, there was a man in a dark kimono, and on the left, a thin, emaciated figure that looked like a woman. The conductor thought it was strange, but tried to check, but there had been no headlights for a few minutes, and in the next moment, the figure had disappeared into the darkness beyond the light of the interior lights. When we heard this, the people who had seen the AOD show earlier lost all color in their lips. But even so, I wondered why Kurasan, who had no reason to commit suicide, was walking along those tracks in the middle of the night on his day off, why he hit a broken bone in a straight line where he could see clearly, and where the green hawk came from and ran him over on those rails in the middle of a rice field. Yoshimura seemed to think the same, but I remembered that today was the same day and place where Kurasan had committed suicide, swallowing his anger at his wife, whom he had constantly abused in her lifetime, and that the mysterious green hawk was next to him as if they had committed a double suicide, and the shadows of a man and woman that the conductor had seen, and Kurasan's severed head, with its terrifying expression on its face and its eyeballs half popping out, and my shoulders and my damp shirt started to tingle with goosebumps. What's more, that night was the wake, but apparently in this area it's still customary to bury the deceased due to religious reasons, and since there was no one there, his colleagues ended up holding a simple, eerie wake and asking a laborer to dig next to his wife's grave, but even though it had only been a year, no matter how much they dug they couldn't find her coffin. When they finally found what looked like a suitable spot, all they found was a small hollow in the pit, with a tiny hole about 1 inch in diameter leading straight up to the ground. We stood there in silence as the rain continued to pour down.